In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. I prayed the gospel very quickly because it's laying out something with which we are all, by this time in our lives, very familiar. The Lord in His ministry, He raised 3 from the dead. There was the little girl in a private room, and then there was the son of the widow of Nain, and then Lazarus. And in each case, fathers of the church have said, well, this comports to those types of sinners who are resurrected. We are all resurrected from the dead. When we come to the baptismal font, we are dead and not alive. Through Christ, we are joined into His life. And so you have this very, very sort of gentle sinner, the little girl. And then you have the man who was a scandal. He was, being brought up and everybody could see him. This is the symbolism that the fathers use. And then the last one, Lazarus, he's an abomination. He stinks. His sins are so bad. But what they are insisting upon is that everyone is redeemable through the salvation of the Lord Jesus Christ and His sacrifice. Now, I want you to listen to Psalm 3. Lord, how have they increased who trouble me? Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in his God. Think about Jesus Christ on the cross and the people coming and hurling these allegations in His teeth, saying, oh, if you're the God, come on down from the cross and we will believe you. Think about these kinds of things. Think about His own number, the 12 that He chose to be with Him. One of them even is in this group. Many are they who rise up against me. And then it has this very interesting word after this 2 very small verses. It says Selah. S-E-L-A-H. I know you've seen that in the Bible, but nobody here knows what it means. Does anybody know? Yes, you see.
You're supposed to pause.
For what?
For meditation and reflection.
For meditation and reflection. Well, you're close. You're very close. If you listen to some music now, even now, I listen to the music of the Sabbath of the Jews from the Hampton Orthodox Synagogue. It's on channel 388 if you have DirecTV. And it's as you expect, it's on Friday. And you will hear them when they're singing, and they will sing something over and over, like, "Oh Lord, how have they increased to trouble me? Oh Lord, how they have increased to trouble me. Oh Lord, Lord, my Lord, how have they increased," etc., etc., etc. Then, if they're going to change the melodic structure or they're going to add instrumentation, this is historically, they will have a pause there, and then they will bring new instruments in. David, of course, he had a harp, but there were other kinds of instruments that were in use during the time of worship. This is just the structure and the format of their glorification of God. But there's another thing that is going on, and this is taken on. This is taken on by Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Now, you have to realize that Saint Gregory was a very spiritual man, and he was very metaphysical, because the exact opposite argument is given by Diodore of Tarsus. And they were contemporary. And Diodore makes fun of Gregory of Nyssa because of what he is going to say. He said, Diodore, that this is just a function of musical arrangement, and that it in no way implies that while one was singing and while one was worshiping, that a word from God himself came into that person. That's what I believe entirely. That is what I believe absolutely and entirely. You have this psalm which contains 8 verses, and it has 3 pauses. Now, you know, the Bible is a book of history, and it is a book for present times, and it's also a book for future times. In the time of David, it was still a book of future times. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. What is the holy hill of the Lord? It's Zion. And Zion, of course, is also symbolically our soul. It's the soul of humanity, the soul of the bride, of the church. So you hear him out of his holy. This to me is extremely relevant. He heard me from his holy hill. Now also, what was the Lord's holy hill that he had not yet seen but spoke about? It's Golgotha. This hill was sanctified by the sacrifice of the Lord on Calvary. And so when the Lord chose Zion and the mountain, he chose to give reference to truth and to justice. You cannot have truth or justice without having a context. And so that's why the Lord gave the law. The law came from the holy mountain. Moses climbed up to see it, and he grabbed a hold of this with all of his strength. And the Lord so protected Moses so that the truth itself wouldn't be overwhelming, that he allowed Moses to see him passing by, but not to look upon his face. But the impact was clear, such that Moses, when he came down the mountain, the people feared because his face was so radiant, and he had to cover his face so that they could look at him without horror. Then we come, after this pause also, he heard me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who set themselves against me round about. This is not the version of the Bible that I like, but it's the version that was on my desk. This English is not my favorite, certainly. I lay down and I slept. Think of Lazarus in this situation. Why did the disciples fear having this psalm? Now they had this psalm for hundreds of years. Did they not? Hundreds of years before the Lord came. And they didn't understand the meaning. Think about it yourself. You have this Bible that you hardly ever look at. But the Bible is going to tell you about future things. And instead of being timorous and afraid of your own shadow, if they had read this and understood it, they would have been full of confidence. Look what the disciples say. Lord, lately they wanted to stone you to death. And we're going back there? And then, Thomas very effusively says, well, let's go and die with him. Thomas was greatly afraid. He was not saying this out of bravery. He was saying this like the person that goes by the graveyard and pretends that he's not scared, so he whistles, and we get this term in English, whistling by as you pass the graveyard. Thomas was greatly afraid, and so were they all. And you know, yet when you watch carefully the scene that is being set by the evangelist, Saint John, you see that everything is put into place so that there cannot be any objection. If he comes to Lazarus too soon, what happens? They'll say, well, he swooned. He was, you know, in a feverish state. You know, it appeared he wasn't breathing. His breathing was so shallow, you know, and they would have made all manner of excuses. But they had sealed him in a tomb. They sealed him in a tomb. I lay down and I slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone, and you have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people. When you read this last part, when you hear not just the appeal to the strength, but knowing what is going to happen. I want you to remember the prophet who, when asked by the Lord, what do you see? He said, I see the rod of an almond tree. And the Lord said to the prophet, thou hast well seen, I will hasten my word to perform it. What did he see? He saw the Christ on the cross. The tree is the cross. And why is it an almond tree? Because it is the first tree that blooms in the spring, and because the almond is in the shape of a drop of blood. So he saw the bloody body of Jesus Christ. This is what the prophet saw. And God said, I will hasten my word to perform it. What else would you give a prophet? He was going to go to his death. He was going to go to people who generally were going to despise him, who were going to rebuke him, who were going to fight with him, doing every manner of thing to oppose him. And how do I give this man confidence? Let him see. So here, historically, David had had a horrible fight with his son Absalom. Absalom means, by the way, the peace of the Father. Now think about what that means in terms of Christ. Although thousands are arrayed against him, why do the heathen rage and the nations imagine vain things? The rulers of this world take up arms against the Lord and against his Christ. Why is this taking place? Is the Lord upset by this? Not at all. Absalom, the peace of the Father. He's at war. David is at war. They're trying to say in all of these things, look, what appears to be a historical event is, it's an image that is being brought forth from the future to you now, so that you can see it and take confidence in it, and so that when all of these things come to pass that are frightening, you of all people will not be frightened. And yes, in fact, it was the case that they were still all frightened, because they, like us, we don't read our Bible. We don't pay attention to the deeper things. I remember one time I went to my father of confession, and he always was reading Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. He was always, his nose was always in that. And if you know him, you know how much he loved these prophets. And he said to me as I came in and sat down and we began to speak, he said, I read this verse, and this is exact quote, I almost lost my mind. Now, how many times had he read that verse before? How many times since his childhood had he read that verse? But now you understand what is taking place is that the Lord is giving him a vision of something that was always there for everyone to see. generally or specifically, but in this moment he saw it. And this is why St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the Cappadocians, has said that in this, it's called Diapsalmos. In the Diapsalmos, the intervention or the space between one verse and another is not just in here because David decided to change the melody or to change the instrumentation. It was because he was speaking as I am speaking to you now, and all of a sudden he was dumbstruck. Remember what dumb means in the Old English. It means mute. You can't speak. He was dumbstruck. And there was a pause because of that. In this is the first time in the first two Psalms in the Bible, you will not find this word Selah, S-E-L-A-H. You will not find it. And it's not merely a pause in the mind of St. Gregory of Nyssa, with whom I agree. Now, of course, the caveat is you have to know this, that St. Gregory of Nyssa was a fan of Origen. And I, too, am a fan of Origen. This is why we have this icon over here, Origen teaching the saints. And if you go and you take a look at it, you men, which you're allowed to, you can see that Gregory of Nyssa is there. But it's impossible for people to believe that something like this would happen unless it has happened to you. And I can tell you now, it has happened to me. It's happened to me about 3-4 times in the last 35 years. Think about that. 3 or 4 times in the last 35 years. Not very frequent. Frequently does it happen. It may be available to me a lot more, but I'm not receptive. Do you understand? When you look at something in the Bible, you have to receive it. It's not enough for you to read it and say, I can repeat it, and this is the meaning of it. No, because if that were the case, change would take place with every new word you had ever read in the Bible. Every single time you read another verse, something inside you would change. It doesn't happen that way, though, because we read the Bible as sort of a discourse. Like these things happened, and it happened to these people, and maybe it will happen to us, and maybe these things relate to us in some fashion. But no, I'm telling you exactly what St. Gregory would be telling you where he's standing here. That David was in possession of a gift that came to him at an inopportune time. Opportune for us, but he had to stop singing. He had to stop the music. It didn't happen to everybody else. Think about it if, sometimes when you're in a string quartet, right? So you will have, you'll have a first violin, you'll have maybe a second violin, maybe a viola and a cello, right? And the first violin is usually the person who is in charge of doing everything, leading in the bowing, all of the other stuff. And they stop. What do the other 3 people do? Think about it. If you're a good musician, you stop too. I've been in concerts, played in concerts is what I'm trying to say. I was the timpanist playing Mendelssohn's Fingal's Cave in the All California Band, orchestra rather. And why I'm trying to say this is that I was looking at my sheet music, and it was time for a timpani roll. The conductor had put down his baton, and I was the last person to see it happen. So in the midst of all of the quiet of the entire room, brrrr, that was me. So I learned this. I never ever again took my eye off the conductor, because it was such an experience. And everybody turned around, all 100 musicians, they turned around and they looked at me. And of course, I'm the timpanist, I'm the only guy that's standing up. with the sticks in my hand. But I'm saying, now here is this song there in praise of God. Think about it, if the deacon is in praise of God and he's singing something and then all of a sudden he just stops. Well, the people around him, they don't pay much attention to him and they just keep on going in our church. But when you have in Jewish service, you have what is called a cantor. And when the cantor stops, things stop. So I simply want to say about this, because we know this so very well. Every personality that is in this story has been parsed over and over. We know the meaning of the resurrection of Lazarus. It's a precursor to the Lord's own resurrection. But to find this in Psalm 3, have you ever started to look at the Psalms that you pray and say, okay, why is this Psalm in the third hour? Why especially this Psalm in the third hour? And what about the Psalms, almost 50% of them, that were left out of our Agabea? 50% of the Psalms are left out. What were they there for? What did they say? Has anybody ever read 151 Psalms? Ever? Okay, so I'm not rebuking you, but I'm trying to say that when you want to understand some of what the disciples have done, it's because they didn't pay attention to them in the way in which it was intended. Oh, this is a story about Absalom and his father, and how they turned Israel against him, and David is crying, "Arise, Lord, save me, oh my God. You've broken the teeth of my enemies." To break the teeth of your enemies, it doesn't mean that the Lord went around with like a little tiny hammer and broke people's teeth. That's not what happened. To break the teeth of his enemy means to break the rebuke, to break the criticism, to break the impetus for people to be content in their own discourse, so that they have nothing left to say at the end. Nothing have they left to say. So I hope that if you have a favorite psalm, you start looking at it and say, what's the intent of this psalm? Besides its ordinary meaning. Because things have, remember, you have the present meaning, which is for you. But you may have a prophetic meaning. Remember, we call David what? The prophet and the king. And of course, David didn't write all of the songs, but songs or psalms, these words are interchangeable. But the point is that it has its history that can be learned. For you, it has to be intuited. You're reading it today. You're reading it for yourself. It has to be intuited. And for the deeper meanings of prophecy, you have to pray to the Lord and ask Him to open up your hearts this way. But I remember when Abunalua told me this. He said, I read this verse and I lost my mind. What does that mean? That he went crazy? No, it means he lost his mind in the depth of the meaning that was now opened to him. It was like a revelation. It was like an epiphany. It was like a ray of light that shone in this moment, and he was dumbstruck. And he couldn't, as David could not sing anymore. There was no time for instruments. He had to recollect himself. And if we had a recording of this psalm, you would hear the difference between the first two verses and then the second two verses and then the last four verses. You would hear the difference in the melodies. You would hear the difference in the instrumentation. Because just as you have some things that will cause you to rise up, you know, one of the things that I like in the church the most, we only do it once. It's called call and response. The priest says something, and then the deacon says something. The priest says something, and then the deacon says something. And it's the same thing. It's the happy tone of agios. And it's this sense of joy that I feel in the congregation when this is doing. If my voice were better, I would make an attempt at doing it, but I'm afraid that I would butcher it and everybody would find it quite unappealing. But I wanted to share this with you because this is something that my mind was opened up to see long ago, and I have not shared it with, but I've given so many discourses about the raising of Lazarus and the meanings that I wanted to try something new with you. And so I hope you've had the patience to forbear with me. Glory be to our God forever. Amen.